Yes, hello there and welcome to today's episode of Weekend Rewind. Yes, this is when we put our hands back into the Join Up Dots vaults, swirl it around a bit and find an episode that maybe has got lost in the midst of time. And this is in response to the amount of requests we get from people who say, David, with all the episodes you've released, where should we start? Well, it's very hard to find a place, so we're just going to randomly pick one, and this is today's episode. Enjoy.
When we're young, we have an amazing, positive outlook about how great life is going to be, but somewhere along the line, we forget to dream and end up settling. Join Up Dots features amazing people who refuse to give up and chose to go after their dreams. This is your blueprint for greatness. So here's your host, live from the back of his garden in the UK, David Ralph.
Yes, hello everybody. Yes, it's the 23rd of December, so you've only got a couple of days until the big fat man comes down your chimney and drinks your beer and leaves your presents and all that kind of stuff. So you really got to sort of crack on. I don't think Amazon will deliver this far near the big day, but it's a lady today who's already up to her neck in wrapping paper because it's her birthday as well. She gets them both in about 3 days. Bit of a drawback on that one, but it's an absolute delight to have her on the show because we almost recorded a few weeks ago and she was so ill and coughing and spluttering. Unlike the tough man that I normally am, I allowed her off and I said, you go and get yourself well, and she wrapped herself up and she's come back good and strong. Hopefully she is, because she is an amazing lady who has pushed herself to achieve true greatness in her life. Yes, I've never seen this, but I bet many of you will have had this question appear on Trivial Pursuit at one time or another. Who was the first woman to row 3 oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian, single-handedly? Well, today's guest is the answer that you'll be looking for, holding 4 world records for ocean rowing, including first woman to row 3 oceans whilst rowing over 15,000 miles, taken around 5 million oar strokes and spent cumulatively over 500 days of her life at sea in a 23-foot rowboat. She uses her ocean rowing adventures to inspire action on the top environmental challenges facing the world today. But the interesting thing to me is that she wasn't an obvious choice, or it doesn't seem to be awarded as an Adventurer of the Year in 2010. As we discussed this during the show, perhaps if she hadn't attended Oxford University, one of the big 2 rowing universities, then there was a good chance that she wouldn't have stepped onto the water like Jesus. Well, not quite like Jesus. And the second interesting thing, amongst all the interesting things, is why she, upon leaving university, slipped effortlessly into the corporate environment for 6 years, where now everything points to big adventures, big dreams, and probably big blisters. So looking back on her life, would she have skipped the corporate gig and launched straight onto the waves, or was this a key part of her finding herself and becoming the lady that she is today? Well, let's find out as we bring onto the show to start joining up dots with the one and only Roz Savage MBE. How are you, Roz?
I'm great, thank you, David. Wow, there is so much I want to pick up on in that introduction, but for now I'll just mention that someone who came along to one of my talks told her little boy that she had met this woman who'd rowed single-handedly across all these oceans, and her son, who I suppose must have been 7 or 8 years old, he went, well, how come she didn't go in circles then?
That's
like
a good
single-handedly.
Point, yeah, that is a good point. What is the point? And what I want to get straight to the chase with on this is, last time we spoke, you were coughing and spluttering, and you were probably not quite as attractive as you are normally. You was ill. When you're in a boat and you're ill, is it the worst place ever? Do you just wish you could sort of just jump off and swim to shore and get out? Or is it quite pleasant that there's no one bothering you and the big pile of tissues that's building up by your feet are just happy to be floating around? Well, what's it like when you're ill in a boat?
Well, you don't really get ill because there aren't any people with germs out there to catch things from. So I was actually remarkably healthy while I was at sea, apart from a bit of seasickness for the first day or 2 of each voyage. But as each voyage was usually between 3 and 5 months, that gives you plenty of time to get over the chucking up over the side of the boat. And I had a broken finger once, but no snotty tissues at all.
Do you actually sort of look at that and you go, because I have been on a couple of boat trips with the kids when we're on holiday, and I go, oh, it'd be great, let's go out on a boat for the day. And after about 10 minutes, I'm desperate to get to the shore because I think I hate this, it's terrible. Do you look at that and go, yeah, I know I'm going to be ill, but it's worth it to get past that? Because I wouldn't. I'd give up within about 30 feet from the shore. I'd be swimming back.
It's quite surprising how many ocean rowers mysteriously come down with, quotes, food poisoning within the first 24 hours of their voyage. And some of them do actually come back. When I set out on my first voyage, I do remember that first night. So I'd left at midday, and by 6 p.m. I'm throwing up over the side and just thinking, what have I done? Why am I here? I'm a management consultant, not an adventurer. But I'd put 14 months of my life into getting ready for that crossing and virtually all of my life savings. So I was in pretty deep. And I think I also have this sometimes fortunate, sometimes unfortunate combination of naive optimism to get myself into things and then too much stubbornness to get myself out of them again. So it's amazing what you can actually get done with that combination.
Well, that is the perfect combination, really, isn't it? To be able to keep on going, because it must. I'll be honest with you, Roz. It sounds dreadful, and there's a lot of sort of challenges that people do, and I kind of think, oh, that would be nice. I'd quite enjoy that. I wouldn't enjoy one iota of what you've done. And it's a bit like, I suppose, you know, when women have babies, and as a man, they go, oh, it was the worst pain ever. Oh, it was dreadful. And then 6 weeks later, they're saying, oh, I'm having another one. And all men kind of go, why? Why would you do that? Why would you put yourself through that? To do that
Childbirth must surely be the only thing on this planet that's worse than man flu.
I tell you what, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because we just push on. We get to it. But it can't be good when you must be on that ocean and you get to the other side. You think, thank God, the last thing I want to see is another ocean. And then you do it again. Why? Why would you do that?
Well, there were many reasons. One was I was extremely keen not to go back to the office. In fact, just a minor correction, but in the intro you said I was management consultant for 6 years. It was actually 11 long years in the office. And really, when I left my last job, they didn't see me for dust. In a way, I'm really happy that I was just bad enough at my job that I got into this really bad downward spiral. Just my self-esteem was being eroded every single day that I went into the office. I sort of had this inkling that I had more to offer the world, and that there were possibilities out there that I would find a lot more fulfilling than just doing a job I didn't like to buy stuff I didn't need. But it's funny, during the 7 years that I was rowing across oceans, not non-stop, obviously, there were, I had to find every single way that I could to motivate myself, because I'm not really a sporty person. I mean, you might laugh at that. I'm also not that keen on seawater. But I just, it was such an amazing way to challenge myself, and I was 50% motivated by wanting to find out what I was capable of, and 50% by having rather belatedly got my green on and got really worried about what we as humans are doing to the planet, or in fact to ourselves ultimately, and really wanted to bring people's attention to that. So I really did find that when you've just got that phenomenal amount of motivation, it's incredible what you can persuade yourself to do. And even though the number of times that I was actually wholeheartedly happy out there on the ocean could probably be counted on the fingers of two hands, it was just massively worthwhile. And so I did also find ways to bribe myself to go back out onto the ocean. After my stereo broke on the first ocean, so I spent 3.5 months alone with my own thoughts, that was a tough one.
Did you sing? Did you do a lot of singing?
that would not cheer me up very much, and I don't think it would cheer up the sea life very much either.
Just a bit of whale music floating around, produced by Roz Savage.
Well, obviously, I sing like a goddess in the middle of the ocean. It's just that there's nobody there to bear witness to it. No, I spent a lot of time counting oar strokes, but then after that, I took multiple iPods with me and listened to some of the most brilliant audiobooks, which made life exponentially easier. It almost felt like cheating, actually, because rowing without any entertainment it takes you into some difficult and sometimes dark places. I'm really glad to have done that. I would never have chosen to do that, but when my stereo and most other things broke, I was sort of left in that situation. And I think in retrospect, it's easy for me to say this, maybe a bit like childbirth, but it feels like it was a real privilege to have all that time alone with my own thoughts in this 21st century when we're so bombarded with input and messages and words and advertising all of the time, to just really get away from all of that and to, I suppose, explore the depths of my soul and find out that actually I'm okay was quite an amazing experience.
Well, that is a key point, isn't it? When you get to that point and you think, yeah, I like myself. I'm okay. I'm all right. Was that a big dot in your life? Because obviously you were saying that you didn't like your corporate gig. You spent 11 years kind of going through the motions, and as many of us do in corporate land, we play a role that's expected of us. But when you were out in that boat and you were floating along and the stars were twinkling and you were probably singing the best of Rick Astley in your head to just get going.
Don't tell everybody.
Is there any way to get over those oceans, you know? And that is one of those moments you must think, yeah, actually, if this all got taken away from me and I was just on an island, I'd still be all right. That's got to be liberation, isn't it?
You're exactly right, actually, and especially when you mention playing a role, because when we're around other people, really up until that point in my life, I'd always been someone's daughter, sister, friend, student, girlfriend, wife, whatever. You're always in relation to other people, and so to actually spend that time really by yourself and just being, it's going to sound a bit pretentious, but, like in relation to yourself and peeling away all of those layers that we acquire as we're growing up and trying to get back to, well, who am I underneath all of this? And which things do I like? And, I found some things like, essentially, I don't like exercise, but I can force myself to do it. There are some, but I could never force myself to row more than 12 hours in a day. There were times when I was like, I really need to put on a push here. Let's try and do 16. And I would reach that point where I just go, to hell with it. I'm going to bed. I can't do any more. And I started off giving myself quite a hard time for that. It's like, why can't I do these extra few hours? And then I just reached a point of acceptance. I realised a lot of things I can do, but rowing 16 hours in a day is something I can't do. So that's...
But the amazing thing with you, and I mean this with the greatest respect, it's going to sound like an insult, but it comes in a package of respect.
Bracing myself.
Yeah. In many ways, you're a bit weird, aren't you? That you will put yourself into these positions, but you don't like exercise. You'll put yourself into this, but you don't like seawater. You put yourself into this. There must have been so many different things that you could have done. But here's the compliment. It sounds like the insult. Here's the compliment. You didn't run away from it. You still went for it. You still tackled the things you don't like, where most people would go, no, that's not for me. I'll watch Netflix and open a bag of Doritos and sit on the sofa and all the world would be good. But you still went for it. Why do you think you're like that?
That's a really bloody good question. There were certain things about it that, well, first of all, that coming back to that naive optimism, It was, I thought it was going to be a lot more enjoyable than it actually was. I'd been reading too much Henry David Thoreau and Walden Pond, and I thought this was going to be my sort of watery Walden, that it was going to be this marvellous sort of philosophical journey into myself. And it was all going to be rather serene and lovely. And it just so wasn't. It was a terrible year to do the Atlantic, really rough, everything broke. I was injured. Ugh. Yeah, it just absolutely sucked to high heaven. But I did find that, again, something I wouldn't have chosen, like the broken stereo, I wouldn't have chosen for it to be that challenging. But on the way across, I had so many insights into how to cope with this enormous challenge. In every single instance, I had my insights as a result of doing it wrong first. Things like looking at the whole 3,000 miles ahead of me and going into a complete freak-out meltdown, rather than what I learned to do, which was to take it one day or sometimes just one rowing shift at a time. And I mean, there were just so many examples of these little aha moments. And at the end of that shift, I'd run into my cabin and jot them down in the back of my logbook so as I wouldn't forget them. And it really was like a crash course in personal development. And I love that stuff. I read all the self-help books and the psychology books and the philosophy books. And I'm just really intrigued by this thing called life and how to live it better. And one of the things that I figured out was that it was exactly because I had such a hellacious time on that first ocean that I learned so much. If it had been a breeze, if I'd have just whisked across in 30 days and gone, oh, well, that was a jolly jape, I wouldn't have learned a thing, really.
But that doesn't answer why you did it again, though, does it? Because, if it was so awful, I know what I'm like. If it was awful, I would get through it and then go, never again. That is it. And the fact that you go and do it again, it's the great respect insult coming to you again. Slightly mad, isn't it?
Well, at the outset, before I did the first ocean, I'd decided that I wanted to do the big three. And so in my mind, that was what success was going to look like. And anything less than that was not going to be success. And in fact, it did help, because on that first ocean, the Atlantic, there were so many times when I thought, I'm learning an awful lot here about how not to row across an ocean. So I could definitely do it better next time. So in a weird way, I was quite keen to get back out onto the ocean, to put myself to the test again, because I was learning so much so fast on the Atlantic that I couldn't really absorb it all. And it was really through giving my talks and writing the book about it, and really kind of doing that work to weave those lessons learned into the way that I just showed up in the world every day. That I thought that was the real learning, because I could easily have left those lessons out there on the ocean. That better version of myself that started to emerge while I was out there could just have evaporated. So it really took some conscious effort of will to absorb those lessons. And then I was quite keen to put myself back into a really challenging situation again to see if I'd got the hang of it. And actually, the first time that I went back out after the Atlantic, it all went pear-shaped quite early on. 10 days out, I ran into a big storm and ended up meeting some very handsome chaps from the US Coast Guard in circumstances I'd rather, by being airlifted, which was not the plan.
And what do you do with your boat? Because this is the thing I always ponder. And it might be one of these obvious things, but I think that if you want to stop a boat from floating away, you put an anchor down. But when you're in the ocean, it's too deep. So how do you stop that boat from just going miles and miles away?
What, you mean after I'd been lifted out of it? It carried on drifting for several days. And I had to get back to to dry land, I had nothing but the clothes I stood up in. No ID, no money. I had to somehow get back to San Francisco. This all happened off the coast of California, and charter a boat and get back out there to salvage my boat, because under the law of the sea, it had been abandoned, and technically anybody could have claimed my boat and it would be theirs legally. So I was in quite a hurry to get back out there. And luckily I had a tracker on board, so I was able to plot its course as it drifted south, and then we were able to head out and intercept it and pick it up.
And did it drift nearer to where you wanted to go, or were you all the time thinking, you bloody Americans, I've got another 6 days on that boat now because of you?
Well, actually, it wasn't really getting closer to Hawaii, or it was more or less going parallel with the shore. And as it turned out, it was too late for me to try again that year. I was really desperate to try again because I got quite an avalanche of criticism online from people who didn't really know that I hadn't called for the rescue, and that if I had wanted rescue, I had private insurance with Global Rescue who do that kind of thing. So there was a lot of like, no, waste of US taxpayers' money, and you were really just trying to commit suicide, weren't you, you stupid cow? And a lot of really hurtful stuff. And so I was really keen just to kind of erase and rewind and have another go. But it was too late to try again that year. I'd have ended up running into winter storms, so I had to bring the boat back and wait 9 months before I could try again. So yet another bloody learning experience, as they say.
It is amazing, though, with life, isn't it? I've been very fortunate doing this job that I've spoken to lots of people who have done amazing stuff, and they've gone around the world. And I was speaking to a gentleman called Graham Hughes, and he was the first guy to travel to every single country by foot. And one day, he did like 200 or something, and he travelled into every single one. And there was this one day, I think from memory, his sister was very, very ill and was on death's door. So he flew back to the United Kingdom to be with her, and then when it finished, and I can't remember whether she passed away, hopefully she didn't, or she got better, he flew back to the same spot, but then people were criticising him and saying, you didn't do it all in one go, to which he sort of replied, well, I never said I was going to do it all in one go. I was just saying that I'm doing every, country by foot. And it seems fascinating that you put yourself out there, you're doing something that is astonishingly adventurous, and people who are sitting on their sofa eating their Doritos and watching Netflix are just criticising. It's a shame that that's how life is, isn't it? But in another way, because you're doing that, you are, it's a compliment, isn't it? Because they're noticing you. For people to start criticising you, it's a blessing in disguise, because otherwise you're going to be invisible Roz doing your corporate gig, sitting behind the desk, nobody knowing that you are.
Yeah, and unfortunately it's the failures that get a hell of a lot more publicity than the successes. But, it was a learning lesson for me. And I did console myself with the realization that all of this criticism actually said a lot more about the critics than it did about me. That maybe they quite enjoy seeing people fail, because then it justifies them in not even trying. Yeah. It's like they're going, yeah, you see, I told you it was a stupid idea.
It was a stupid idea, though, wasn't it? I'm sitting here thinking this is a stupid idea for the best of people.
Have I not managed to convince you that it actually made perfect logical sense to me at the time?
No, not the third one. I haven't got through to the third one. So the first one was dreadful. The second one, you had all the incidents and stuff, and I could go with the second one. The first one was dreadful, and you wanted to prove to yourself on the second one that you'd got better at it. But then it's the third one. The third one, I would go, leave it to somebody else.
Well, actually, it felt more like the fifth one was the final one, because I did the Pacific in 3 stages over 3 years, not including the failed attempt. Each of those stages was about the same distance as the Atlantic, a bit less. So when I got to the third one, I must admit, I don't really tend to talk about the third one very much. I'm certainly not planning to write a book about it because, okay, I found some different problems. I mean, every single time I go out there, I manage to make new mistakes, which is quite an achievement. On the third ocean, it was the electrical system went on the on the fritz, and I hate working with electricity. It scares me. But I didn't have much choice, so I had to conquer my fear of electrical systems. But really, by the time I got to the end of the third one, I was totally done. I'd been there, done that, got the calluses. I really felt like I'd learned everything that there was to learn in a 23-foot rowboat. And I was really, maybe, even looking back at my career, I had to sort of do that to death. I had to reach the point where I absolutely couldn't stand to go into the office one single more time. Before I was really ready to move on. And maybe it was the same with the ocean rowing, that I had to go, yep, I've really done this to death now. I'm ready to move on to the next thing.
But does it define you? Because do you get annoyed when people say, this is Ros Savage, she's done this and that? And without sort of naming lots of names, I find that the problem with the adventurers is that they've done one amazing thing. They've got their name in the books, but they sort of say, well, I've done so much more. There's other things I've done. That's never going to define me. There was a lady called Cathy O'Dowd, first lady to get to the top of Everest from both sides. And she was absolutely firm on, that is not going to be my legacy. I only stood at the top for 45 minutes, and hopefully I'm going to be on this planet for a lot longer than 45 minutes. Don't define me by that. Do you find that as well? Do you feel like you want to keep on saying, look, sod the boats, let's talk about this?
It's kind of a double-edged sword, because the whole reason that half of the reason that I did it was to get people's attention so that I could talk about the environment, and in fact, a lot of other things besides. And it certainly has opened doors for me. It does get people's attention, and it starts conversations. I would very much like to think that my best years are still ahead of me, because I feel like I've learned a lot about how to cope with big, scary, gnarly challenges that nobody else really wants to do. And I'm trying to figure out how to take that ability to cope and use it more directly to make the world a better place. So bizarrely, I thought about getting into politics. I realised that saying that straight after making the world a better place, people might be going, what, really? Yeah. But that's an example of something that most people don't want to do, probably for very valid reasons. And ultimately, it's something I decided that I didn't want to do. But where I'm going with that is, for me, the ocean rowing was a stepping stone. And I do realise that until the day I die, and maybe even beyond, that is going to be the headline, because it is so far still unique for a woman to have done that. So I don't mind it when I'm described that way. I suppose what I do mind a bit is I want it to be the start of a big conversation. Like, I love talking about the psychology of it, and how do we cope with these things? How do you motivate yourself when you're not feeling motivated? How do you conquer your self-imposed limitations? That's what I want to be talking about. So I do get a little bit frustrated, and I'm sorry if you were going to ask me this, but if people say, "Oh, so what did you eat?" or "What happens when you sleep?" I'm just like, I'm delighted that they're interested, but I have to slightly grit my teeth, because I must have been asked those questions a gazillion times, and it's just not interesting to me.
Ros, I wouldn't be so shallow. I promise you, I am a professional broadcaster. I would go straight to, where did you go to the toilet? That's the one that I would...
I usually only get that question from audiences age 13 and under.
Damn.
So thank you, David.
you found my spiritual age. Now, what I want to do is actually take you firmly into what you've just led into. You're a professional, because this is a speech that Jim Carrey did a few years ago, but it says so much about what we're talking about. This is Jim Carrey.
My father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that that was possible for him. And so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a safe job as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job, and our family had to do whatever we could to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on doing what you love.
Now, the thing about that is, did you know that you were going to love it, or was it just something to do? Could you have done, I don't know, that you were going to roller skate around the earth or do something? There was obviously a big challenge waiting for you to prove yourself, but was it going to be that, and did you love it?
Oh, well, something quite strange happened because after I quit my job, I didn't immediately go out to row across oceans. I had to really try and figure out a few things about myself, like who am I and what do I care about and what am I here for? And so I went through what I call my happy dabbling phase. So I tried out various different jobs, and none of them quite clicked with me. I was a photographer for a couple of years and an organic baker for a bit, and I travelled around Peru and wrote a book about that. Did a few other things as well. And from each of those things, I found out something about myself, things that I liked, things that I didn't like. And so I was starting to assemble a kind of shopping list of ingredients that would be included, that would go into this recipe to cook up my next big project. But I really didn't know what that next big project was going to be. So the kind of things that were going on for me were certainly the environmental mission, emerging from a marriage, so I was really wanting to make some sort of statement about my fierce independence. In Peru, I'd really enjoyed the trekking, the sort of physical adventure, done a bit of mountaineering as well, so that was a theme. I'd also met a guy who'd rowed across the Atlantic with his mother, and although at the time I didn't immediately think, oh, there's something I'd like to do, I suppose
That sounds dreadful, doesn't it? Yeah. We spend our time trying to get away from our mums in a boat for all that time. God. She'd be sending me to bed at 7:30 at night. It'd be dreadful.
So all of these ingredients were sort of assembling themselves. But I never actually sat down and went through one of these career advice books and thought, oh, so it says I should go row an ocean. Funnily enough, not many career advice books say that. I was actually just driving along one day, completely minding my own business, thinking of nothing in particular, when this crazy idea just came to me that I would row across oceans in order to raise environmental awareness. And to this day, I don't know where that idea came from, whether it was from my subconscious, from outside of me somewhere, some kind of divine calling, or some kind of devil calling. I really don't know. It was pretty random, actually.
And were you still in corporate land at this time?
No, this was about 4 years after I'd quit my job.
So what was scarier, quitting your job and then dabbling for 4 years, or doing that? Was it like the leap of faith when you hadn't got a fixed plan?
Oh, a lot of it was very scary, like terrifying. And that whole thing about security that Jim Carrey was saying, I think that is something that I acquired during those years, and I was often very, very strapped for cash. It was I learned a lot about how little money I actually need. A lot of people were incredibly kind to me. I was often able to live in places rent-free. I'm not saying they were all salubrious places, but I had a roof over my head. And so I really learned to sort of trust that life would turn out okay. I basically became secure with insecurity. And rather than sort of clinging on to things like relationships or jobs in order to feel secure, I just kind of really jumped out of the plane and then started making my parachute. And yeah, it was scary, but it was also really liberating because
you must have had to battle all those people that were saying, oh, Roz, you've got a university education. What are you doing? You're throwing it all away. Let's sit down with you. Did you have all that kind of naysayers and crabs trying to drag you back into the bucket?
I think a lot of people were thinking that. Not many of them actually said it to me. And even if they had, I don't think it would have made any difference to me because I was kind of having fun with it. I was very serious growing up. I was very good at jumping through hoops at school. If I was told to study something, and I was one of those really annoying girly swats that would always do my homework on the night it was set rather than the night before it was due. And so I'd never really failed. I'd never really screwed up at anything. And so to screw up at quite a lot of things, have a failed career and a failed marriage, actually really liberated me to lighten up and start playing life more like a game rather than being so deathly serious about everything.
That is fascinating, isn't it? And that says so much about your spirit going forward, that you got to a point when, what's the worst that's going to happen? Really, you've gone through all those emotional ties that we get tied down with, really, from sort of birth onwards, when we go through the school system and the teachers are saying this is what you should be doing and you've got to be sensible, and we do play that role, as we were saying, all the way through our lives. But you got to that point that you quite cleverly, or not cleverly, life did it, started cutting those ties to the point where you were free. You was at that point of freedom that so many or so few people experience.
Well, as Janis Joplin said, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
Oh, I quote that all the time on this show. Do you know that, Roz? If you ever want to jump on a podcast and be my sidekick, then we've got it.
Sure. You might regret having said that.
Who would get top billing?
Well, you, of course. Of course, it's your podcast.
Join Up Roz. What about that?
But it is such a great sentiment, really, isn't it? Because I think some of those things that we think give us security, like Jim Carrey's dad, all of those things can be taken away from us. Spouses can die or leave, and jobs can end. You could be fired or made redundant. There are so many things that we become so attached to, and they end up actually trapping us rather. I mean, it's great if you can keep those things in their place and sort of go, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I've got all my basics taken care of, so now I can really focus on being my best self. But too often, those things that are meant to just give us the platform, the essentials, to free us up to focus on those higher things, we actually end up getting so caught up in all the stuff, all the things on our to-do list, all the, even the material things. I used to be terribly materialistic. My parents didn't have very much money when I was growing up. They were both Methodist preachers, and I got really bored with not having money, and really wanted to have the big house and all the stuff. And so that was what kept me in that job that I didn't like for so long. It just took me down this ridiculous path because I thought that having all the stuff was going to make me happy and call me a bit slow on the uptake. But 11 years down that path, I sort of went, oh, hang on, I'm really bloody miserable. So there's something wrong with my theory.
But do you think you have to get to that base level, though? As Janis Joplin was saying, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And it's absolutely true. If you suddenly had everything taken away from you, and I muse about this a lot on the show because it's one of these kind of phrases that just seems, it's just options galore. I would walk away from the house that I haven't got anymore. I would stand on my road and think, what should I do? And I'd go left or right, and I'd reach into my pocket. Oh, I haven't got anything. And it would just be choices and choices. And you're not protecting anything. You're just going forward. And do you think the fact that so many successful people gain, then lose, and then come back stronger, it says a lot about that mindset?
I do. Of course, we do tend to hear more about the people who go from rags to riches and then rags to riches again. If they just stay in rags, we tend not to hear about them quite so much. But having said that, I think when you've got that mindset of, money is a renewable resource. We have a lot of things on the planet that are not renewable, but our own motivation, our money, our good fortune can be renewed when you're just kind of determined that everything's going to turn out right in the end, and if it's not right yet, it means it hasn't ended yet. So I suppose, yeah, essentially I am an optimistic person. I'm very fortunate in that mostly I've been able to choose my own challenges, be they on or off the ocean. There are obviously some people who life just throws all kinds of stuff at them, and they just have to dig deep to cope with, disability or disease or bereavement, or whatever. I'm in the very fortunate position that I made choices, and hard choices, but I was still in control of that situation. And so then I had to kind of think, well, if I'm not going to look like a real idiot, I've got to make this come good. So I did put a bit of pressure on myself.
But do you think you was in control, though? Because when you make those choices, it's all right making those choices, but then it's just out of your control, isn't it? You've got to work towards it to make sure that it goes the way you want.
Well, actually, I suppose some of the choices were subconscious and some were conscious. So I think maybe I should explain something that I did a couple of years before I quit my job that really, looking back, was maybe the first big dot. And that was when I was still in my job. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, even though I was in my early 30s by that point. And so I did this exercise that I think I found in a book, but that's been lost in the mists of time. And this exercise suggested that I should write two versions of my own obituary, the one that I wanted and the one that I was heading for if I carried on as I was. And that exercise for me was a huge eye-opener. Well, more like a slap in the face, actually. I realised that I was going more or less 180 degrees in the wrong direction from where I wanted to go if I was going to end up with the obituary that I wanted. And yet, even then, I didn't have the courage to take that choice to quit my job. I was still too attached to that, in quotes, security. But I think something happened when I was writing that fantasy obituary, and I can remember how exciting it was to write it. I wasn't really writing about what I would do, but I was writing about the kind of person I would be, and I was thinking about the obituaries that I really enjoyed reading, about these inspiring people who just seemed to live life courageously and really get out there and succeed or fail, but like you're just saying, they would, even if they failed, pick themselves up and have another go. And as I was writing it, it felt so real to me that it was almost like I'd opened up this portal into this alternative universe and this life that I was supposed to be living, rather than this rather mundane, quotes again, secure life. And so I think subconsciously I started to even sabotage myself in certain ways, sabotage my career and my relationship in order to get myself on track for that fantasy obituary. And so that was really the prime mover out of my dots, from which many other dots and choices flowed.
I do think it's fascinating. Obviously, on Join Up Dots, when you look back, it's quite easy to join up the dots and say, yes, because of this and because of that and whatever, this is how I got here. But it is still, it's like that Gwyneth Paltrow film. Do you remember that Sliding Doors where you could go through one left door or the right door and your life would be totally different? And all those choices, yes, we do join them up, and it looks like, you are from rag to riches. You wouldn't be on this show if you was just in rags. I totally accept that. But you've still had to make those right choices. Are you somebody that likes to make those choices, or at your heart, would you like those to be sort of given to you so you don't have to think about it?
I was talking about this with a friend the other day, because her theory is that we all have a particular theme in this lifetime. She believes in reincarnation, and she felt that her theme was freedom, but she saw that very much as a double-edged sword, because any time that she tried to be settled as a mother or as a wife, it seemed like life came along and unsettled her again to set her free. And so I was thinking about this, and I felt like my theme in this lifetime seems to be tough choices. That time and again, like even including the Coast Guard rescue, that came to a very focused crunch point at which I had to make that decision about whether to accept rescue or not. And most of the choices that we make in life are based on extremely imperfect information. And well, certainly in my life. So would I prefer someone else to make those choices? Actually, really not, because I think it's those choices that have defined me. And it's that exercise of free will that really creates our destiny. I don't think that our destiny is mapped out for us. I think it's up to us to create. Is it George Bernard Shaw who said, we don't discover ourselves, we define ourselves, or words to that effect anyway. So I'm all about free will and tough choices. So even though they can be really almost crushingly hard at the time, I wouldn't have it any other way.
And I certainly wouldn't go over an ocean with my mum. I keep on coming back to that, and I think, that man, what's he thinking about? That just puts a tough activity to the borderline of, I don't know, suicide or whatever.
Well, actually, they enjoyed it so much. They did that for her 50th birthday. For her 60th birthday, they trekked to the North Pole. So, I guess it worked out well for them. But my mum was most certainly not on for rowing with me.
No, I don't think many people would be, though, would they?
I bumped into an ocean rowing friend the other day, and in a couple of weeks, actually by the time this goes out, he'll be out there on the ocean. He is setting out to row across the Atlantic with his father, who is 79 years old.
But does it surprise you when you say that statement of, I bumped into an ocean rowing friend the other day, what kind of life you've created? Because that's an unusual statement. I think that's the first time anyone's ever said that to me.
What does Amazon call them? It calls them statistically improbable phrases.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, actually. When I was working in the office, I would mostly meet the same people at work. I would socialise with the same people. I would see the same people on the commuter train. It felt like my life was jogging along in a very narrow track. And since I kind of leapt out of the aeroplane, it's been absolutely brilliant, the people that I've met all across the world. Just some of the most interesting, fascinating, deep thinking, soul searching, expansive people. And I feel so lucky. I really, really do. If I'd have had any idea just what awesome people I was going to meet, I think I'd have quit my job much sooner. Although having said that, I'm glad that I quit it when I did, because it coincided very nicely with really the advent of blogging and social media, and really the explosion of the internet, which opened up so many more possibilities for me. But there are some absolutely amazing people in this world, and I feel very lucky that a large number of them are friends of mine.
Do you know, I'm going to start saying, my friend Roz Savage. Do you know Roz Savage? I'm going to start dropping those kind of statements in as well. I didn't realise. I've spoken to 500 people now. I can do those kind of phrases, can't I?
Well, really weird small world things start happening. Like, I was in New York a few weeks ago and walking down Fifth Avenue, and this woman stopped me to ask me for directions. And I started saying, well, actually, I don't live here. And she went, hang on, I know you. And she said, you're Roz, aren't you? I said, yes. She said, the rower. I said, yes. She said, I followed your blog all the way across the Indian Ocean. And the really bizarre thing is she doesn't even live in New York. She's from Vancouver, and she was just there with her daughter to look at universities. And I don't live in New York either. I would just, what are the odds that she and I would bump into each other on Fifth Avenue. I mean, obviously everyone on Fifth Avenue's heard of me, but I was just absolutely, I'm still trying to figure out what that means.
And was it autograph or selfie?
Oh, you know what? We didn't. We just kind of...
Because I'm quite proud. I've never done a selfie in my life. And it's one of those things I'm going to hold firm to.
Well, actually, I was doing selfies before they were called selfies, because on the ocean, when I was posting blogs, I needed to take photos of what was going on, and taking pictures of the ocean every day gets a bit old fairly soon. So I did have to take pictures of myself because there was no one else there to do it. But that was long before the advent of selfie sticks.
And what did you do? What did you do to make these pictures interesting? Because obviously you're on a 23-foot boat or something and it's full of tissues, but that's it. How did you make these photos interesting?
Pulled silly faces. I don't know. I think people just like to kind of see my sunburn, or what hair looks like after it hasn't been washed for 3 months, or I think there is something that people just get. I mean, you know this, which is why you interview adventurers for your show. There's something about people being in obscure places doing obscure things that tends to fascinate people. I think I'm not for a moment calling myself a hero, but it's that classic hero's journey, you know, the quest to explore uncharted territories. You know, there be dragons or krakens or whatever. So I don't think the photos even needed to be all that interesting, really. It was just the fact of where they were taken that made them interesting. Does that make any sense?
It makes total sense. It really does. And the adventurous spirit is certainly in me, big time. I have this fantasy. Shall I tell you my fantasy, Ros?
That's a very dangerous question.
It's all right. No one's listening. It's just you and me. But I have this fantasy, and I've always had this, that I saw this episode of Darren Brown, you know, the sort of hypnotist guy, and he had this guy in a photo booth, and where you have your passport photos taken.
Oh, yeah.
And the guy was just going along the street and he didn't realise that Darren Brown, his hypnotist, had been following him for about 2 weeks and had done a load of weird things to his brain without him knowing. And he went into this booth to have his photo taken, and when it flash, like it does for your passport photo, he went into a coma. And they got him out of this booth, put him in an airplane, took him over to Africa, and then put him in the same booth, and then flashed it twice. He came back to life again. And when he stepped out, he was in sort of Chelsea when he went in, and he was in, I don't know, Morocco when he got out. And he was so distant. He just didn't know where he was, and he sort of struggled around, hello, and he just couldn't understand how he got into Africa. Now, I have this fantasy that the same thing happens to me, but I find this little silver box, and it's got some coins in, and it's got like a map, and I have to find my way home. I don't know where I am, and I keep on having that fantasy come back and time again. What does that say about me, Ross Savage? Am I having a midlife crisis? Am I going mad? What's happening?
Well, I could suggest that you should go and see a therapist, but actually, I think that sounds really cool. I do feel quite sorry for the poor guy who suddenly finds himself in Africa. I think that could lead to some serious trauma. But I think we are fascinated by mystery, by adventure, by having this sort of treasure, something to look for. And I suppose now that all of the world has mostly been explored, maybe those treasures that we're looking for are more internal rather than external. Maybe we are looking to find out what we're capable of when we're presented with a challenge, you know, like you suddenly coming to and finding yourself somewhere very unexpected. So I think that sort of, you know, our psyche is what the 21st century explorer is exploring.
Did you think we're lacking that? Before I played the theme of the whole show, Steve Jobs' speech back in 2005, but do you think that ultimately, if you went back far enough, we would wake up in the morning and the whole day was about survival. We were either going to be eaten by something or something was going to kill us, and it was all about sort of battling. And now it's so comfortable in many regards. Do you think something deep inside of us is craving for that madness every while?
I think human beings, by definition, enjoy challenges. Well, maybe not all of them, but certainly when you look back over our history and how we have evolved to take care of our basic needs so that we can spend more time doing other things and exploring new territories and inventing new devices and creating new art and new ideas. We love to evolve both individually and collectively. So I think that's a very natural aspect of being human. And actually, it's one of my real passions, is that I do think we're all here to evolve. And the things that really annoy me in this world are the things that get in the way of people's evolution, be that not thinking or education that doesn't encourage creativity, or be it inequality and unfairness in whatever shape or form. Anything that gets in the way of people evolving to be better tomorrow than they are today, that just really annoys me. So I that's why I hope that I'll always keep evolving and pushing myself harder and doing more challenging things. And I've moved on from physical adventure now. I don't feel the urge to do anything more in that realm. But if I ever stop challenging myself, then something's gone horribly wrong.
So I'm not going to play the Steve Jobs speech now because it's my show. I'm going to move straight to the end of it. But if somebody says to you in 10 years' time, and here she is, adventurer Ros Savage, and somebody shouts out the back, she hasn't done anything adventurous for the last 15 years, would you be able to sort of stand up there and go, well, actually, there's not a time scale on it. Adventure is because of spirit and more of an achievement somehow.
Yeah, and it's not just that there isn't a time scale on it, it's that adventure can take so many different forms. I mean, as you've said, rowing across oceans isn't for everybody, nor is climbing mountains or trekking to poles. But adventure can take so many different, I mean, even, I've never had children, but for many people, parenthood is a great adventure into the unknown as they try and raise this little being that arrived in the world without an instruction manual. And if that's not a big challenge, I don't know what is. So I hope that I will still own the word adventurer till the end of my life, because I hope I will still be conspicuously adventuring into new realms, even though they may be intellectual or political or academic rather than physical.
I think you will as well. Go to Basildon in Essex. That'll be an adventure for you. Just down the road
from Birmingham yesterday.
Oh, I do apologise. I really do apologise. Get back in your boat for safety and just sail off. Well, this is the end of the show now, and this is the part that we call the Sermon on the Mic, when we send you back in time to have a one-on-one with your younger self. And if you could go back in time and speak to the young Ros, what age would you choose and what advice would you give? Well, we're going to play the theme tune, and when it fades, you're up. This is the Sermon on the Mic.
Here we go with the best bit of the show, the Sermon on the Mic, the Sermon on the Mic.
Ooh, I'm going to choose the age of 16, which was when I went to California for the first time. And as I mentioned earlier, I came from this not very rich family, and I was just blown away by the Californian lifestyle. These big houses with swimming pools and, gasp, more than one bathroom. I just thought it was heaven on earth, and that was what I wanted. And if I could go back and speak to my 16-year-old self, Well, first of all, I would say, love, get a different hairdo. You're going to be so embarrassed by that one later on. But I would also say, don't be taken in by all of this. You can be happy without all this stuff. You could be miserable with all this stuff. Don't sell your soul just to get all this stuff. It's just shiny things. And ultimately, as the one-legged sailor Tristan Jones once wrote, the only true riches in life are to be found between your ears. So go out, be adventurous, have amazing experiences, meet amazing people, have amazing conversations. Don't get distracted by all these new shiny things, exciting though they seem.
Roz, what's the number one best way that our audience can connect with you?
I am currently blogging on a weekly basis at rozsavagecoaching.com. That's Roz with a Z or a Z, depending on where you are. So please come and find me there. And that links to my other hangouts on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn.
We'll have all the links on the show notes. Roz, thank you so much for spending time with us today on your birthday, joining up those dots. And please come back again when you have more dots to join up, because I do believe that by joining up the dots and connecting our past is the best way to build our futures. Roz Savage, thank you so much.
Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, David.
Well, I did my best on that one to ask the kind of questions that she probably hasn't been asked before, but believe me, there were questions going through my mind which weren't fit for a family show. So maybe, hopefully, we'll get Roz back on the show again later, but I'm sure you agree she was an absolute delight and inspiration and slightly mad to be able to do those kind of things. But we need people like that in the world, and hopefully all of you lot will be inspired to go after your own madness and leave your own legacy. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you so much for everything. Have a lovely Christmas, because it's just 2 days down the line, Fat Man's coming, and we will see you again soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Weekend Rewind with Join Up Dots. If you're inspired by podcasts and have the desire to create one yourself and build income into your life, doing something that's incredibly fun, whether you've got a business already or you're just starting from scratch, we have got the number one tutorials for you. Go over to podcastersmastery.com and you will be sent a free 12-part video course teaching you how to start podcasting. So that's podcastersmastery.com, and of course next weekend we will have another episode of Weekend Rewind.
David doesn't want you to become a faded version of the brilliant self you were once to become. So he's put together an amazing guide for you called the 8 Pieces of Advice That Every Successful Entrepreneur Practices, including the 2 that changed his life. Head over to joinupdots.com to download this amazing guide for free, and we'll see you tomorrow on Join Up Dots.